It was the busiest wedding season Linda had ever seen at her little flower shop. Orders poured in, deposits hit her account, and for a moment, it felt like the universe had finally opened its vault. But just 3 months later, the vault slammed shut. A roof repair, a sick father, a failed investment, and her savings vanished almost overnight. Most people blamed the economy. Rachel, her old friend and a Feng Shui consultant, blamed her nose. Not in a cruel way, but with a knowing smile, saying that a single shift in the bridge of her nose had tilted the flow of her money luck. Have you ever felt like the moment money comes in, something else swoops in to take it away? Or noticed how some people seem to hold their fortune while others keep watching it slip through their fingers? This is Wisdom of Feng Shui, where old truths meet the quiet corners of everyday life. If you've ever had a strange turn in your finances, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. What changed just before it happened? Because Linda's story begins with the kind of nose most people call lucky until the energy decided otherwise. Linda had one of those noses people in her neighborhood called a lucky vault. Rounded at the tip, full at the bridge, soft in its curves. It gave her face a calm warmth that made strangers trust her instantly. At the Saturday farmers market, older women would point her out to their daughters and whisper, "That's the kind of nose that holds fortune." Linda would laugh politely, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, never thinking too much of it. But over the years, something strange started to happen. Whenever her flower shop had a surge of orders, a corporate event, a string of weddings, a big holiday season, she'd see her bank balance swell, only to feel her shoulders tighten and her nights grow restless. It wasn't just the long hours. It was a quiet, creeping fear. If she let her guard down, the money might vanish. She began to work harder, not because she wanted more, but because she was afraid to lose what she already had. In Feng Shui, a rounded, full lion's nose is a sign of abundance, like a reservoir designed to hold wealth close. But any reservoir, no matter how well built, can overflow or stagnate if the channels in and out are blocked. Energy works the same way. If you only focus on holding without letting anything circulate, that abundance can turn heavy, even suffocating. It's the paradox no one tells you about, the blessing that becomes a burden. Linda didn't notice at first. She stopped taking long lunches with her father. She started checking her shop's sales report 3, 4, 5 times a day. Even when she had enough, it didn't feel like enough. Not because of greed, but because the fear of loss had taken root. And fear has its own way of choking the very fortune it's trying to protect. It's like keeping a pantry so full that you can't see what's in the back. You think you're ready for anything, but half of what's inside has quietly gone stale. Wealth, like food, needs rotation, needs movement. Otherwise, it begins to spoil. According to traditional Chinese medicine, the nose connects to the spleen and stomach meridians, the body's natural storehouses. A rounded bridge can reflect strong capacity for holding resources, but if circulation is poor, whether from chronic stress, shallow breathing, or a constant state of guarding, the body treats that abundance like pressure, not freedom. And when the body is under pressure, the mind follows. Rachel, an old friend and Feng Shui consultant, noticed Linda's tension before Linda could even name it. One afternoon, she walked into the shop, listened quietly, and then said, "You don't need more flowers in here, Linda. You need a little water." She suggested a small tabletop fountain by the register, not to attract more customers, but to remind Linda every day that wealth is meant to move. She also taught her a simple breathing ritual, 3 deep inhales through the nose, imagining golden light filling the bridge, and 3 slow exhales, sending that light out into the world. Linda smiled at the thought. Maybe the luckiest vault isn't the one with the heaviest lock, but the one that lets a little air in. And just as she began to loosen her grip on what she thought was hers to guard, she met someone whose sharp, curved nose carried a very different kind of energy, one that seemed to pull fortune in like a hawk in flight. Linda first noticed her at the town's business mixer, a woman whose presence seemed to pull the air toward her. Tall, confident, and with a sharp, curved nose that caught the light whenever she turned her head. People didn't just talk to her, they leaned in, as if she carried answers no one else had. It was the kind of silent authority that made deals happen over a single handshake. Her name was Catherine Hale, owner of 3 boutique hotels along the coast. Her friends joked that she could smell opportunity before anyone else, and in a way, she could. Her career was a string of perfectly timed moves, from buying properties just before the market soared to securing investors others thought impossible. In Feng Shui, that sharp, hooked hawk nose is often linked to ambition and the instinct to seize, energy that draws power, status, and resources toward the person who carries it. But every pull comes with a push. For Catherine, the same magnetism that brought her fortune also made her a target. Competitors tried to undercut her, rumors spread faster than truth, and some friends quietly drifted away, convinced she was always on the hunt. It made Linda wonder, how much of success is about drawing things in, and how much is about keeping what arrives? According to observations in both Feng Shui and behavioral psychology, people with naturally assertive facial features often cultivate habits that amplify their influence, taking the first move in negotiations, speaking with decisive pauses, maintaining unbroken eye contact. These habits can open doors, but they can also leave others feeling taken, not invited. One evening, over tea, Catherine admitted something Linda didn't expect. "I can get what I want," she said, "but sometimes I wonder if I've lost the joy of wanting it." It was a reminder that power, when unbalanced, can be isolating. You can win the room and still walk out alone. Linda thought about her own situation. If she kept guarding her fortune too tightly, she risked the same loneliness, a different shape, but the same weight. And maybe that's the real question for anyone. Would you rather pull everything toward you and stand apart, or let some things pass and keep your circle warm? If you've ever felt torn between chasing more and holding on to what you have, share your thoughts in the comments. It's always fascinating to see how different people strike that balance. The next week, a customer walked into Linda's shop whose nose seemed the opposite of Catherine's. Low, soft, almost retreating. Yet there was something in her calm that made Linda curious about another side of fortune entirely. The woman who stepped into Linda's shop that morning looked like she belonged in a quiet library rather than a busy street. Her nose was low and soft, almost disappearing into the gentle lines of her face. Most people in a rush wouldn't notice it at all. And maybe that was the point. She didn't draw attention, yet she carried herself as if she had nothing to chase, nothing to prove. Her name was Marlene, a retired school librarian who came in once a month for fresh lilies. When she paid, she always used cash, the bills folded neatly in a worn leather wallet. She never looked rushed, never seemed worried about the price. Linda assumed she was simply comfortable, but what she learned later surprised her. Marlene wasn't wealthy in the conventional sense, yet she had never once been in debt. In Feng Shui, a flat nose is often misread as a sign of weak fortune or low earning capacity. But in practice, it can also point to someone who avoids unnecessary risk, values steady routines, and builds security slowly. It's like a garden that never boasts the tallest flowers, but always has something blooming year-round. Marlene explained that she'd lived in the same small house for 40 years, driven the same car for 20, and kept her expenses well below her means. There was no drama, no big wins, but also no sudden losses. It made Linda wonder if chasing higher peaks had blinded her to the quiet safety of steady ground. According to research on financial behavior, people who naturally prefer low visibility, whether in appearance or in social habits, tend to take fewer speculative risks. They're less likely to be swept up by trends, more likely to keep what they earn. Of course, the trade-off is missing certain opportunities that require bold, visible moves. Marlene put it simply, "I never aimed for more than I needed. That way, I never had to fear losing what I had." It wasn't resignation, it was design, choosing peace over pursuit, certainty over expansion. and Linda couldn't ignore the quiet power in that choice, especially compared to Catherine's sharp, ambitious energy. As Marlene left, the shop door swinging gently behind her, Linda found herself thinking about balance again. Different shapes, different flows, each carrying its own kind of fortune, until one is disturbed. And she was about to meet someone whose perfectly straight nose seemed like the very definition of balance, at least on the surface. The man in the corner table of the cafe looked like he had stepped out of an old photograph. Crisp white shirt, sleeves neatly rolled, posture straight as a ruler. What caught Linda's eye wasn't his composure, but the perfect line of his nose. It was straight from bridge to tip, almost symmetrical enough to make you doubt it was real. There was something unsettling about that kind of precision, as if nothing in his life was ever out of place. His name was Daniel Ross, a financial planner who came into the shop later that week for a bouquet of irises. He spoke politely, listened fully, and seemed to weigh every word before letting it leave his mouth. People like him, Linda thought, could probably walk a tightrope without wobbling. In Feng Shui, a perfectly straight nose is often seen as a clear channel, a path where energy can move without obstruction. It suggests balance, self-discipline, and a steady relationship with resources. The kind of feature that might not make you rich overnight, but can keep you financially and emotionally stable for decades. Yet Daniel's story added a quiet layer to that ideal. He had built a comfortable life, no debts, predictable returns on his investments, a home he planned to keep forever. But when a rare opportunity came to invest in a friend's promising startup, he hesitated and lost the chance. Months later, that startup was acquired for millions. Daniel didn't regret his decision, at least not openly, but Linda could hear the pause in his voice when he said, "It just wasn't in my nature to gamble." It made her think about how balance works in real life. Too much caution can keep you safe, but it can also keep you standing in the same place while others move ahead. And maybe that's the trade-off of a perfectly straight path. You never stumble, but you might never leap. According to social behavior studies, people with highly symmetrical features are often perceived as more trustworthy and reliable, which can open certain doors. But that same reliability can make them resistant to change, especially when it carries uncertainty. It's the choice between a smooth, predictable river and the rush of whitewater. One offers peace, the other possibility. Linda left that conversation wondering how much of her own life was shaped by habits she thought were keeping her safe. And then she met someone whose nose defied every rule she'd just been thinking about, tilted just enough to send energy and luck in unpredictable directions. The delivery driver had barely stepped into the shop before Linda noticed it. His nose tilted slightly to the left, just enough that it seemed to pull his smile off-center. It wasn't something you'd stare at, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And the more he spoke, the more his life seemed to match that angle, everything just a little off track. His name was Greg, and he was the kind of person who always seemed to be fixing something. His car, his apartment, his last job. One week, he'd be talking about saving for a house. The next, he'd be covering an unexpected bill for a relative or replacing a broken water heater. It wasn't that he didn't earn enough. It was that his plans kept drifting like a compass that never pointed exactly north. In Feng Shui, a nose that tilts or curves to one side can indicate an uneven flow of energy. Wealth may enter, but it often leaks out through channels you don't see coming. Accidents, sudden obligations, small but constant expenses. It's not a curse, it's a pattern. And patterns, if left unchecked, tend to repeat. Greg admitted that he often jumped in to help others before securing his own needs. That generosity made him well-liked, but it also kept him from building a real safety net. It raised the quiet question: how much of bad luck is actually the cost of choosing to put others first? Psychologists have noted that people who carry physical asymmetries, whether from birth or injury, sometimes develop compensating behaviors, overextending to prove reliability, taking on more than they should to avoid being underestimated. This can win them loyalty, but it can also drain their resources faster than they can replace them. Linda found herself thinking about the choice Greg faced every time. Say yes and watch his savings take another hit, or say no and risk the subtle shift in how people saw him. Neither option was without loss. If you've ever had a season where your efforts seemed to spill out faster than you could refill them, you'll know how heavy that balance feels. It's the kind of experience worth talking about, maybe even in the comments, because hearing how others manage it can remind you there are more ways forward than the one you're used to. Later that week, Linda would meet someone whose story was far closer to her own. Someone who had changed the very shape of their nose, hoping to change their fate, only to find that altering the surface had shifted something much deeper. Linda never thought she'd change her face. But one morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, she noticed the curve in her nose she'd ignored for years. It wasn't dramatic, just a faint slope on the right side, the kind you'd only spot if you were looking for it. Still, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, it was the reason her luck never seemed to stay put. The idea started small. A quick consultation, just to see. The surgeon showed her digital mock-ups, a perfectly straight bridge, a slightly lifted tip, symmetry she'd never had. It was tempting, like the promise of wiping a slate clean. Within weeks, she was lying under bright surgical lights, trusting that reshaping bone and cartilage could also reshape her fortune. At first, it felt like it worked. Her shop had its best quarter in years, new clients seemed to find her without effort, and she caught herself smiling more in photos. But then came the slow unraveling, a pipe burst in her kitchen, an unexpected tax bill, a canceled wedding order that left her with hundreds of unsold flowers. It was as if money rushed in through the front door only to slide right back out the side window. Rachel, ever observant, visited her during one of those chaotic weeks. "You've realigned the outside," she said gently, "but you've thrown the inside off." In Feng Shui, she explained, the nose isn't just a feature, it's part of the body's main axis, the vertical line that connects mind, breath, and grounding. Altering its shape can subtly change how energy moves through that axis, especially if the internal habits stay the same. It made Linda wonder if her problem had never been the curve itself, but the way she carried it. Like changing the frame of a doorway without fixing the hinges, it might look perfect, but the door still sticks. Research in behavioral science echoes this idea. Cosmetic changes can boost confidence in the short term, but without deeper shifts in mindset or environment, old patterns tend to reassert themselves. For Linda, the trade-off was clear. She'd gained a face that fit magazine symmetry, but lost the quiet stability she hadn't realized she had before. By the time she sat alone in her shop that evening, arranging the last bouquet of the day, she knew the next step wasn't about another change to her face. It was about learning how to steady the flow of her fortune, no matter what the mirror showed. And that path began with small, deliberate rituals, the kind that could bring her nose, her breath, and her life back into alignment. Linda's first morning without makeup in weeks felt strangely liberating. She stood by the window, the early light catching every line, every change in her face since the surgery. It wasn't the perfect symmetry from the doctor's photos anymore. A faint softness had returned, and with it, a sense of ease she hadn't realized she missed. The shift began quietly. Rachel had given her a small jade roller, instructing her to use it each morning while breathing through her nose. Slow, deliberate inhales, even slower exhales. At first, it felt like a beauty routine, but after a week, Linda noticed her shoulders weren't as tense. Her mind wasn't racing the moment she woke up. The rituals weren't changing her nose back, they were changing how she carried it. In Feng Shui, balance isn't about freezing things in place. It's about creating a flow where nothing feels forced. Linda started placing a tiny bowl of water with fresh petals near her bed, a symbol of gentle movement. She rearranged her shop so the cash register sat in a spot that faced the morning light. Small adjustments, almost invisible to a casual observer, but they began to tilt the energy back into alignment. It made her think about how often people try to fix the surface first hoping the inside will follow. In truth, the inside sets the pace. The body, the breath, the spaces we live in, they all respond to patterns we can't see but can feel when something is off. According to wellness studies, habits practiced daily, even for 5 minutes, can reshape not just muscle memory, but the brain's stress responses. For someone chasing stability, those micro habits can be the difference between holding on to what's theirs and watching it drift away. Linda realized she had a choice she'd been avoiding. She could keep chasing external fixes, the next adjustment, the next perfect angle, or she could build a foundation that wouldn't crumble every time life shifted. This time, she chose the latter. By the end of the month, her shop felt lighter, not because more money came in, but because what did arrive seemed to stay. And as she locked the door one evening, she caught her reflection in the glass. Not the old nose, not the new one, just a face at peace with the flow it carried. Some people will say that your nose can shape your fortune. Others will say it's just coincidence. I think, and this is just my point of view, that features might set the stage, but it's the way we carry them and the energy we let flow through them that writes the real story. This kind of content isn't about predicting anyone's life or putting people into boxes. It's about noticing the subtle ways our bodies, our spaces, and our choices interact. What you take from it is up to you. Keep what resonates and let the rest pass. If you've got your own thoughts on how appearance and energy connect, I'd honestly love to hear them. And if you found something here worth thinking about, you might enjoy the next video coming up soon. Until then, take care of your space, your breath, and yourself. Your space speaks. Wisdom listens.